Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar where we're going to go through the revised standards that came out in July for RTOs. So to get the most out of this webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A where you can put in your questions. We'll be checking them throughout as we go along, and at the end of this webinar, there'll be an opportunity for us to have a look through this further and go through more questions as well. There's also a survey that we're going to be collecting at the end of this webinar. It should pop up on your screen as soon as the webinar finishes. Please do fill this in because we do look at your feedback after each webinar that we do, and we try to cater the webinars so that you get more value out of them. So definitely fill that in, and share your thoughts. I'll definitely be looking at that afterwards. It's a very exciting webinar for us today because it's probably been one of the largest in terms of registrations for us, in terms of our customers, about a very important topic. So I just wanted to introduce the presenters for today. So we have Michelle Armstrong. She's our customer success specialist. She's had substantial experience in the industry. She is also an expert in compliance and has worked as a compliance manager. And we have Kevin Ekendahl from Audit Express. He's the CEO of Audit Express. Kevin has worked in senior management positions in the training and education sector for more than 12 years. Kevin has led hundreds of audits, ensuring compliance with industry standards and legislations, and ensuring quality audits are conducted within project deadlines. Kevin was previously a member of the Victorian Board of the Medical Board of Australia and contributed towards the regulation of the medical profession by developing standards, codes, and guidelines. In terms of this session, what we're going to be doing is we're going to explore each of the standards for RTOs and showcase how Wisenet can be used to enhance aspects of compliance. So now I'm going to hand over to Kevin and Michelle.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to today's session. It's great to have so many with us today on this very important session. I know the new standards have been we do any sessions on the new standards, we always get great response. I'm going to assume everyone has read the standards from top to toe. You've memorized every clause and every aspect of the standards. I'll just make that assumption. Maybe I should just talk for myself for that as well. But as you know, and as you're probably aware, there's three key components to the new standards. So we have the outcome standards document. So that's essentially where the standards are actually housed. We've got the compliance standards or the compliance requirements. This is another legislative instrument which actually outlines what I'll call the binary. It's either you make it or you're making or you're compliant or you're not compliant. And then the credentials policy, which is a document which outlines the credentials required for people to deliver training and assessment, to supervise training and assessment, or even to undertake validation as well. So the three documents together form the standards for RTOs 2025. And we're now day 31 into the new standards. So I'm going to make an assumption that everyone is ready to rock and roll, or should be ready to rock and roll with the new standards. But the reality is that I think many organisations are still in the process of transitioning to the new standards, or if they have transitioned, being absolutely confident that they've met all of the requirements to the new standards. I've been talking about these new standards, obviously, since about, I think it was March, April, when they were finally passed as a legislative instrument. And one of the key themes that I've found from our discussions is that the difference, I suppose, in the types of language that there is in the standards and what that actually means. Now, I suppose for the purpose of the standards themselves, to make sure there's consistent high quality training that leads to quality outcomes for students, industry, employers, and the Australian community. And essentially, it's making sure that assessment is delivered that meets industry requirements, so that industry that essentially, in a roundabout way, set the standard or the competency standards. They want to make sure that the people that they employ have the skills and knowledge required to do the jobs that are required to be done. And likewise, making sure that people are getting the education and training they need to further progress their own training and education or integrate into the community of its foundation skills as well. We've got the Q&A pod. So what I'll do is give you, I suppose, a heads up that you please put any questions that you may have into the Q&A pod. I'll pause occasionally to answer some of those questions if you've got any questions that come through. And I'll try and leave some time at the very end to answer some of your questions as well. So if you can ask me any questions, or you can ask Michelle questions as well if there's some specific things from Wisenet that you'd like answered. Um, as I said before, it is important to go through each of the standards, and that's what I want to do is go through the outcome standards. I've only highlighted some of the more important ones. We've only got an hour together, so I don't think I'll be able to get to the depths of every single weed in the garden for looking at each of the nuances of the standards because we do have limited time to get through all of this together. I do encourage you to contact Wisenet as well, and Michelle, who's very knowledgeable in all things Wisenet and the standards and compliance as well, because it is important to look at how your student management system can assist in your compliance and quality outcomes for your organisation. And I know Wisenet are investing a lot in making sure their clients and people that use the Wisenet platform make sure you're helping them achieve quality outcomes by using the platform. So, in terms of the structure of the outcome standards, we've got the quality areas. So, as you know, there's four main quality areas, and those quality areas then have different focus areas. So, as you can see here on the screen, we've got the focus area for quality area one is training and assessment, and each of these focus areas has its own standard. And the standard is what we actually need to meet. And then each standard has its own performance indicator. So these are the things that we need to do in order to meet that particular standard. So what I've done for this particular session is I've identified, we're going to go through all four quality areas. We're going to touch on look, they're all important standards. There's no non-important standards, but we'll touch on some of the more important ones where there's a change or a nuance in these new standards as opposed to what we might be used to. And I suppose just to start off as well, I think it's important to think of these new standards as a change, a paradigm shift, or a change of the way of thinking in terms of how we meet compliance and quality. So we need to stop asking ourselves, are we compliant? Because we want to move away from this hashtag compliant framework to how can we prove quality? And a lot of these standards, or the way these standards are actually written and the way you'll read them, is all about the outcome, hence the outcome standards. So we need to think about how we actually achieve these outcomes. We're looking at the outcome from what we're actually doing, not all of the inputs that are in there. So they're a little bit less prescriptive in a sense, in terms of saying, well, this is what you need to have, and saying this is what you need to achieve through your organizations in terms of quality. And part of this now is up to RTOs to demonstrate and have a rationale as to how they actually meet each of the components of the standards. So again, we need to stop asking, are we compliant? Yes or no, to how can we actually prove quality? How can we actually demonstrate and provide a rationale as to how we've met these particular standards and how we can actually demonstrate that we've got quality outcomes through the education and training of our students, through them gaining jobs in terms of feedback that we're getting from employers. So there's different ways of demonstrating this quality. And I think we need that paradigm shift, a different way of thinking in terms of how we actually apply these new standards. And that brings me to the moment that everything changed. And that's, I suppose, the emphasis of what I want to get across today is that the standards for RTOs 2025 brings a stronger focus on those outcomes rather than the inputs. How can we demonstrate that we've got good quality outcomes? How can we demonstrate that students are getting the skills and knowledge and training that they need to get the jobs that they need, and industry is getting the skills that they need through your delivery of training and assessment? Another key component is the increased responsibility on self-assurance. And if we look at self-assurance and what it actually means, it's about you assuring yourselves as RTOs that you're satisfied that you've got good quality outcomes. What's the data that you're relying on? How do you check the systems and processes you've got in place to make sure you're always meeting your obligations and doing what you need to do when you need to do it with good quality outcomes, of course. And there's those clearer expectations of the evidence. So less prescription, but more expectation around your demonstration of good quality outcomes. So how can you actually do this? Then that's what we'll go through with each of these standards, how you can actually try and demonstrate that you're meeting your obligations. And as I said before, this is not just a simple update. If we look back at all of the standards we've had since, at least the last 15, 20 years, we had the AQTF and then the SNR standards and the standards for RTOs 2015, and now these standards. The previous standards were all relatively similar. You could have mapped them across and said, these are the similar sort of standards, and we can try and just, update our policies and procedures from 1.5 to 6.2 or to 2.3 to 9.5 or whatever it may be. But these standards now are quite different. This is all about the outcome of what you're actually doing. The language is slightly different. There's a nuance to these standards that isn't the same as the previous standards. And yes, no doubt there's some similarities here and there, and a couple of those we can go through as well. But now it's up to organisations to demonstrate how they meet it, provide a rationale, having strategies, having a systematic and strategic process for looking at how they actually comply with and deliver quality training and assessment. So that brings me on to the beginning, the very beginning. So quality area one around training and assessment. And as you can see here, we've got our key focus areas around training, assessment, the recognition of prior learning and credit transfer, and the facilities and equipment as well. And this is what I'll call the business end. This is what we're in business for as RTOs, whether you're a public or private or community organisation, it doesn't matter. This is the key standard or the quality area about the delivery of our training and assessment. And I'll discuss some of the nuances, and what I might do is just highlight some of the key things that I think are very important in regards to these outcome standards and how we can actually demonstrate compliance across these particular areas. And again, for this particular standard, Standard 1.1, it says that training is engaging, well structured, and enables vet students to attain skills and knowledge consistent with a training product. So this is the standard or the outcome that we need to achieve. And I think the key thing here is around being engaging and well structured, and how we actually demonstrate what engaging and well structured is. And I think this is where the nuance of this particular standard comes along, because what might be engaging to me might be very not engaging to you. So there is subjectivity around what is engaging and what's well structured. And so when we think about how we actually implement this now, it's about what evidence and data that we collect to assure ourselves to say, well, it is engaging and it is well structured because the feedback we're getting, the independent reviews we've got, the feedback we're getting from students and how they're actually engaging with it, all points to it being engaging or potentially not engaging. So this is a great example of where we have to think about, our paradigm shift, not just having a TAS in place, a training and assessment strategy. This is probably the closest thing that we've got to mandating a training assessment strategy. But what we want to look at here is how we've actually demonstrated that we've met our obligations, we're collecting data, and we're demonstrating that we've actually got engaging and well-structured courses. Standard 1.2 looks at engagement with industry, employers, and community representatives, effectively informs the industry relevance of training offered by the NBR registered training organisation. Now, one of the key things here is obviously industry, employer, and I'll circle the and, sorry for my very bad mouse skills, and community representatives. And the key thing here is that it's no longer sufficient just to engage with some industry representatives, but now we're also looking at what community actually means for our organisations. And I know there's been lots of discussions in the market recently about, what does community mean? Is community just the industry community that we're referring to? And I think this is now up to RTOs to really demonstrate how they define what industry and community is for them, for the type of training and assessment they're delivering, and importantly, especially around community, the types of cohorts they're actually delivering to. So if you're delivering to culturally and linguistically diverse background cohorts predominantly, there might be some community expectations that you'll need to engage with them. If you're delivering to school-age students through Vet DSS, then it might be those sort of communities that you're referring to. So again, it's up to now the organisation or the RTOs to say, this is what industry is for us, for what we're delivering, and this is what community means for us as an organisation as well. So really, it's how you identify the relevant industry and employer representatives, employer and community representatives, and getting that meaningful advice and feedback from those representatives to inform your training and assessment strategies and practices as you go through those. Standard 1.3 looks at or says that the assessment system is fit for purpose and consistent with the training product. And what I wanted to do here is underline and highlight this concept of fit for purpose. Again, a very subjective and ambiguous, perhaps, concept. What is fit for purpose, and how do we actually demonstrate what is fit for purpose? Now, if I go through these performance indicators where it says the assessment's consistent with the requirements of the training product, yep, so we need to make sure it's obviously valid. This is just the training component and our assessment, of course. Our assessment tools are reviewed prior to use. And I'll underline reviewed because there is a little nuance here, but it says assessment tools are reviewed prior to use to ensure assessment can be conducted in a way that's consistent with the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. Now, in my language, undertaking a review to make sure it meets the principles of assessment rules of evidence is a form of validation. However, they didn't use the word validation, so it doesn't necessarily need to meet the threshold of validation of the standards. And the outcomes of any such reviews informs the necessary changes to the assessment tools. So now when we look at our assessment system, being fit for purpose means that we need to meet the training package requirements, so they're valid. We review them prior to use, and that review is not only meeting the principles of assessment rules of evidence, but also making sure that anything you identify in those reviews are actually used to inform any changes to those assessment tools. Now, this is a huge change from the existing standards, but in reality, if you really think about how you would have done this previously, it's most likely you would have probably reviewed your assessment tools prior to use. I'm going to make an assumption. But now it's about how you actually retain that evidence and demonstrate a systematic and a strategic approach to reviewing your assessment tools prior to using them, and what evidence you're actually going to keep to support demonstrating good quality outcomes and demonstrating that you've got an assessment system that's fit for purpose. Now, likewise, you might also want to collect relevant data through your validation processes to say, yes, this assessment system that we have reviewed and we've now validated is fit for purpose because this is the data and feedback that we've got from students, from employers, or whatever it may be. Now, I've skipped 1.4, and the reason why I skipped 1.4, it's the principles of assessment rules of evidence. So I'm not going to go through that with you. I think everyone who's been in the vet sector for at least a week or done their TAE should know the principles of assessment rules of evidence. There's no huge deviation either from the principles of assessment rules of evidence. So that's why I've skipped that particular part. I'm going to touch on validation only very briefly because validation is still a requirement. Thank goodness. It's our second line of defense in terms of how we approach it. But I think what's nuanced with validation and what's very important to understand as well is using that risk-based approach of undertaking validation. Now, that risk-based approach has always been a part of the 2015 standards previously, but now it's explicit in terms of what risks they're actually asking you to look at. So it's formed by any risks to training outcomes, any changes to the training product, any feedback from vet students, trainers, assessors, and industry. And part of that is looking at the components of the assessment system which are to be validated and the sample size that are to be validated. So when we're looking now at our training products that we've got on our scope, for example, we might have different, 5, 10, 20, 300 qualifications in our scope. We now need to do a risk assessment of all of the components of those qualifications or training products to determine what are the high risk areas in those training products and what's the sample size of the components and what's the sample size of the actual completed assessments that we need to check as part of our validation process. So when we're looking now at validation, there's not a huge deviation from what we should have been doing previously, but now it is a little bit more explicit as to what are the risks that we need to do and how we actually take a risk-based approach to validation. I won't go too much into detail into the makeup of who has to do validation because essentially it's pretty much the same. People need to have the competency and currency of the qualification or the training product or the units of competency that are being validated, plus they need to have the credentials of a TAE. Now, likewise, if they're validating the TAE, there's different credentials that they need to have. So they need to have at least the qualification that they're validating, and ideally higher requirements. And there's also a requirement for independent validation, which again is a continuation of the previous standards as well. And standard 1.8, and I skipped RPL and credit transfer. Again, there's not a huge deviation from RPL and credit transfer, so I've skipped those. But in 1.8, we're looking at the facilities, resources, and equipment for each training product are fit for purpose, safe, accessible, and sufficient. And let me just underline these key components as well. So again, we've got this term of fit for purpose. So we need to make sure our facilities, resources, and equipment are fit for purpose. And how do we actually do that? How do we demonstrate that they're fit for purpose? Well, again, we need to identify how the facilities, resources, equipment are required to deliver training, and how we identify which facilities, resources, and equipment will be provided by third parties. So we need to say this is our these are the training products that we deliver, and these are the facilities, equipment, resources, consumables that we need to deliver each component of these uh, training products. And so, I'll give an example of commercial cookery. So if they're actually under delivering commercial cookery, well, you need commercial kitchens, you need 1.5 meters, 1.2 to 5 meters of bench space per student. You need one oven between two students. You need all these equipment and resources, and then you need all the consumables. You need meat and fish and eggs and flour and all the things that you need to cook the food with. So in terms of doing this, we're saying, well, this is what we're going to deliver. These are all the facilities, equipment, resources, and consumables that we'll need to deliver each of these components. And this is how we've demonstrated that we've got access to this. They're safe, they're accessible, and we've got enough for the number of students that we're delivering to. So again, there's many ways of demonstrating this. Now it's up to RTOs to think about how they actually systematically and strategically approach their facilities and equipment to make sure they are fit for purpose, and how you actually collect enough evidence and information to support that as well. Now, look, I might hand over to Michelle very briefly now as well, just to look at how we can apply components of quality area one and using Wisenet as a great student management system to actually help implement this new quality area. Michelle.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Look, in Wisenet, we've had these same sort of tools, but you may well find that you're not using or are not aware of them. So things like our, course enrollment logs books or our course log books can be used to keep your evidence of your things like your facilities and resources equipment checklist, information about the employer and industry's engagement with all of this, the records of your TAS, and you can use things like our checklists to track whether these have been completed each year. We've got all those resources there in our Learn pages, so please refer to those. But all of this sort of these tools are there for you to be able to use and keep records of it, and then you're able to run reports to see, if that's been all checked off. You can use tasks to make sure that these are set tasks for someone to complete at a certain time, and things like your SurveyMonkey can be integrated with Wisenet, and then you can keep the records of all the feedback from the students as well as the industry engagement in Wisenet in file notes, or even if you've got it in your online drive, you can then have the links to those so that it's easily accessible when you need to pull that evidence out at times of audit. So please have a look at all of that and think about the things that you can do to automate these, like using Learn Cycles to send out your SurveyMonkey survey links so that you're collecting that evidence as, a matter of process rather than, thinking about it later and after the students and sending out sort of surveys here and there. Make sure that you can collect all that evidence without sort of, too much people needing to remember to do things, and then have that all stored in the one place under that course so that it's easily accessible. So if you've got any other questions about that, pop up a support ticket and we'll help put you in the right direction for these things. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Michelle. And look, that brings me on to vet student support, which is, again, now a very explicit component of the new standards. And in this is about our provision of information, how we actually support the provision of training support for students, how we actually make sure there's diversity and inclusion, we're looking after the well-being of our students, and there's a feedback and complaints process. So when we look at Standard 2.1, which says that vet students have access to clear and accurate information concerning the organisation, the relevant training product, and students are made aware of any changes that affect them. And look, really, when we think about it, there's not a huge deviation. If we think of the old Standard 5 of the 2015 standards, there's not a huge deviation to make sure that you're providing accurate information to students about what they're enrolling into, the training product, how long it's going to be, giving them all of that information. And I won't go through all of these with you necessarily because they're pretty straightforward, making sure that you've informed students and they're making informed decisions about undertaking training with you. It's a pretty much what I call a no-brainer, most of this in terms of making sure that you get all of the information right. And what I would strongly recommend in terms of this process is really understanding or putting yourself in the lens of the student, walking through the student's version of enrolling and interacting with you as an RTO. So when they're looking at enrolling into a program, so they're actually providing all of their event miss details and you've advertised to them, going through that perspective to say, what information are you actually giving to the students? How are you actually capturing that information? Are you getting them to sign off on the process of reading the information and understanding it? And I know Wisenet has some great enrolment modules as well to actually make sure that you collect that information as you go along in terms of how they're enrolling into the programs and how you're capturing that information as part of that process. Standard 2 says that vet students are advised prior to enrolment about the suitability of the training product for them, taking into account the student's skills and competencies. Now, this again is very much similar to the old, what I call standard 5.1, where we're actually making sure we're undertaking some sort of assessment or in pre-training review of our students' skills and abilities and competencies to ensure that the program that they're going to enroll into is suitable and appropriate for them. So we need to take into account all of the prior skills, knowledge, language literacy, numeracy, and digital literacy of the students. And once we do this review, before we enroll them into the program, we use the outcome of that information to make sure that the program they're about to enroll into is suitable and appropriate. We don't want to set people up for failure and say, you might have a pre-level 1 ACSF and we're going to enroll you into this diploma of basket weaving where it's got, very high literacy, numeracy, and digital literacy requirements, for example. So you want to make sure you've got good systems and processes in place where you've identified the skills needs to successfully complete that qualification or that training product, and if they don't have that, you're actually going to provide the support to assist those students or those cohorts through that particular program to make sure you can assist them to complete the program. Standard 3 says that vet students have access to support services, trainers and assessors and other staff to support their progress throughout the training program. And I think the key component here is that they have access to support services, trainers and assessors. Because essentially what we need to make sure of here is how do you actually now demonstrate that you've provided access to the support services and your trainers and assessors? And interestingly, there's a lot of training organisations that have previously had purely online training and assessment. So you enrol, you don't see anyone for months and just upload all of your information. Now we need to demonstrate how you can actually give access to the support services and trainers and assessors through that process. And likewise, if you're a fully face-to-face organisation, how do you actually demonstrate access to, and what does that actually mean? Do they only get access during their class time, or is there time outside of that where they can actually access the support services and their trainers and assessors? So part of this as well is how you determine the training support services that you need to provide to each student. And again, this is not to each cohort, but to each vet student. So this is now a personal determination. And so again, using Wisenet and a program like Wisenet is where you might record a lot of this information to say, this is how we're going to record the information from our determination to the types of support services that we're actually going to provide. As I mentioned before, vet students have access to trainers and assessors and other staff who are responsible for supporting the vet student. So how you provide that access, is it just through the learning management system? Do you have other means to actually provide that access? Again, these are the different things that you need to consider and how you're going to demonstrate that you've met this component. Vet students are informed by the organisation about how and when they can access trainers and assessors and other staff, and queries from vet students are responded to in a timely manner. And again, that's very subjective. My timely manner is if I've sent you an email, I want a response within 5 minutes. That's whereas you're happy if someone doesn't respond for another 6 months. Very subjective. So how do we define what a timely manner is for our organisation, and how do we then inform our students and other stakeholders to say what a timely manner means for us? So if you are going to request a trainer and assessor, you can expect a response within 48 hours. You can expect a response within a week. Again, at least you're demonstrating what you've defined as a timely manner, what's suitable, and what's, to use a colloquialism, you don't want to take the piss, so to speak. You want to make sure that you're responding in a timely manner and informing students of what that actually means for your organisation. Standard 2.4, reasonable adjustments are made to support vet students with disability to access and participate in training and assessment on an equal basis. And I think this is really a very important component. And this is all around, I suppose, equity, making sure that we've got a fair and equitable access to training and assessment services. Now, again, there might be circumstances where you may not be able to provide those reasonable adjustments if it compromises the integrity of the unit of competency. There is, I suppose, if we look at B here, our get out clause is that reasonable adjustments are made for vet students with disability where appropriate. And so if it's not appropriate, if you're going to compromise the unit of competency, there are exceptions to those rules because, again, we need to demonstrate that people can actually perform to the standard required if it's a requirement of that particular standard. And I won't give too many examples there, but I'm sure that you've got examples in your own organisations as to how that can apply. Michelle, one of the key areas, and I suppose a very important component, is vet student support. And I know Wisenet has some great functionality to actually support RTOs who are supporting students. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Yes, we have some very exciting things that are newly released, but along with the other things that we were talking about, where you can store, your marketing materials and approvals of your marketing materials in the course logbooks. The other things that Kevin was discussing is Wisenet's inbound email function is very great for having all that correspondence with your learners and being available for your learners as when they're putting in their emails and things like that. And that's all stored within Wisenet rather than in someone's email inbox somewhere, and then you've got to search through everyone's inbox email to find out, what was the trail of all of that. So using Wisenet's inbound email addresses and email logbooks is a really good way of making sure all that evidence of your communications with the students and your response times is all stored within Wisenet. And the other big exciting one that we've got is Wisenet support cases. So a few weeks ago, we had a webinar showing you all the benefits of our new learner app and how the learner support cases work. It's in early release now, and we've got some customers already testing it for us and giving feedback on it. And what this is a learner-facing ticketing system for students that can streamline your learner support, enhance your communications with your students, so you can confidently meet the expectations while also automating and storing the evidence in one seamless experience. So really encourage you to have a look at the webinar that we did, which was called Enhancing the Learning Experience. We've got the link there. And then also have a look at our Wisenet sales, which is also something available to everyone. So not just the Sales Plus. So we're also talking about the learners who are just inquiring, because you also need to make sure that you're providing that information that's correct before they actually enroll, and should have evidence of all of that. So the Wisenet sales allows you to have an inquiry form where you can provide the information to the students, and you've got that all stored in the logbooks in the sales section as well. And as we were also talking about Sales Plus, this module allows you to provide details about the course, and you update that in-app in Wisenet, so that if there's anything that's not quite right or you need to add something else, it's very easy to update what you've got published for the students. And you can also collect any required information, so not just all your vet-miss stuff. There will also be maybe, depending on the student cohort, you might be needing to ask additional questions, and Wisenet's sort of custom fields can be added and custom questions can be added to our online enrolment forms and application forms, so that you're collecting that additional information that you need to collect. So yeah, I really encourage you to have a look at the support cases. It's very exciting, and we're really happy to be releasing that. It allows you also to have, the different bits of the categories that the students might want to put in to make it really seamless and easy for the students to communicate, and all that communication is stored in there. And the other part that we've got is when we're talking about the trainers and the assessors, and we're talking about the staff that also need to do professional development activities. Wisenet is, your reporting system for your event miss outcomes and all of that, but you can also use it for your storing your professional development. So you can set up your professional development courses with all the modules that your staff needs to do. You can have offers for each year or each period that they need to do those and track their completion of the required professional development activities that not just your trainers and assessors need to do, but also your staff, because they need to do some diversity and inclusion training as well. So you can keep track of whether that training has been done and issue statements of attendance for the staff members that have done that and store those records within Wisenet using Wisenet credential function as well. Right, thanks, Kevin. Back to you.
Thanks, Michelle. Look, there's a feature that you mentioned there earlier, just especially around student support, which I think will be a great feature for I suppose monitoring student support, and that's that email capture function. So, is that something that's automatically set up, or something that RTOs
Yeah.
need to contextualize
Yeah.
to their organisation?
So it is automatically set up. Originally, we just had emails that could be sent out of Wisenet, but now you can select to have the replies come back into Wisenet with the inbound emails. And so the full thread of the conversations with the students is stored in the logbooks. So instead of, as I said, going to someone's inbox because they've been emailing, the admin or the student support or whatever email, it can all be stored in Wisenet and can be easily saved and accessible when needed.
Fantastic. Look, I know just some tales from the audit trail. I know I went to an audit, auditing an RTO, and I said, give me some examples of providing support to students, and the trainers were giving amazing support, and I had a support person there. But when it came time to the audit, they couldn't find any of this because whoever was on holiday, it was in their inbox. Someone left, and it was inside an email trail that no one could get access to anymore. So this is a great function. So if it isn't set up properly in your organization, certainly worth talking to Michelle and getting tips on how to set it up effectively in your organization.
Thanks,
And that
Jonas.
brings me on to diversity and inclusion. Sorry, Michelle, I might let you add on to that
No,
if you want.
that's exactly it. So it may be something that, as we've released more and more improvements to it, it may not have been implemented. So definitely, get in contact with us and log a support ticket and inquire if you want some more information about it all.
Fantastic. Thank you. And that brings me on to diversity and inclusion. And now this is the new component of the standards, which is specifically about diversity and inclusion. And I think it's a great addition because it says that the learning environment promotes and supports the diversity of vet students. And I suppose what we're looking at here is the rich tapestry that makes up the Australian community and international community we're delivering overseas, and understanding the diversity, whether it be gender diversity, ability diversity, people with disabilities, sexuality, ethnicity, socioeconomic backgrounds, because we've got a range of different people and we need to understand and promote and support the diversity of our students. So here we need to foster a safe, inclusive learning environment for vet students. And again, it could be very subjective to some people to say, how do we actually foster a safe and inclusive learning environment? And likewise, we need to foster a culturally safe learning environment for First Nations people. So now there's explicit requirements about how we actually do this. And again, this is a part of the outcome standards. How do we actually achieve this as organizations? What's the process that we need to do and go through to make sure that we do foster a safe and inclusive learning environment. We collect data that makes sure that students do feel safe and included. There's equity as well, as we mentioned in our reasonable adjustments earlier as well, and we create that environment for our students. So again, it comes down to training of staff, and of course you can log it all in Wisenet as well, which is fantastic, as Michelle indicated as well. Now, very specifically in these new standards is the requirement for looking after the pastoral care or the well-being of students as well. And again, this is going to be very different from RTO to RTO. You might be delivering a one unit, a 1 day, 1 unit of competency type course, or you might have apprentices and trainees for a 4 year period. So it's going to be a huge variation between RTO to RTO in terms of how you actually provide that support and the well-being support, and how you actually, or what duty of care you might have for those particular students. So here it says that the well-being needs of vet students for the vet student cohort are identified and strategies are put in place to support the needs. And again, what we're looking at here in particular, it's for the student cohort area. So we're saying, how do we actually make sure the types of students that we deliver training to. We've considered their wellbeing needs, and this is what we're going to do. So if you do have that 1 day, 1 unit course where people enroll in the morning and out by the afternoon, do you have to have the whole wraparound services for those students versus if you have apprentices and trainees, for example, and you've got a duty of care over that 4 year period for their training. Likewise, if they're remote students versus on-site students or they're work in the workplace students, you need to think about what does that well-being need or what's required for the cohort and how can we actually offer that to our cohorts and our students. And again, a very obvious one is around feedback and complaints, and I've left both of these in there. There's feedback and there's complaints and there's appeals. They're two very similar standards in terms of complaints and appeals, but again, making sure you have mechanisms for effectively managing any feedback and complaints and appeals, having it documented. If you look at what you had to do under the 2015 standards and you apply that now, it's most likely you will have a relatively robust system, making sure there's clear timelines and deadlines to respond to students and meet their expectations around complaints handling. The next is quality area 3, the vet workforce, and I think this is again not a huge deviation from what was required, and perhaps some argue that it's a bit of a watering down of the previous standards, especially around the requirements around industry currency and the credentials and the credentials policy. Look, I won't go through these in too much detail, but obviously we need to make sure that the workforce is effectively managed to ensure appropriate staffing to deliver the services. So now there's a requirement to demonstrate how do we manage our workforce? How many trainers and assessors and support services and admin staff do we actually need to manage our operations for the type of training we're delivering and for the number of students that we have? So what we're looking at here is how do you ensure the number of trainers and assessors and other staff, not just trainers and assessors, are appropriate for the delivery of services that you deliver? How do you actually determine that? Is one trainer and assessor for 500 students sufficient? It could be, I'm not sure. It's up to you now to demonstrate and provide a rationale as to how that is appropriate or sufficient for the number of students that you've got in terms of the types of training you're doing and what the trainers and assessors are required to do. And also, I think this is a new nuance of the standards is that you need to facilitate access to continuing professional development, opportunities to enable staff in the organisation to effectively perform their role. What I'm going to say here is it's not just trainers and assessors now that need to do professional development. It's all staff from admin, enrolment, sales, support services, management, board of directors. Everyone now is required to have, or you need to facilitate access at least to continuing professional development. And then also quantify, what professional development is required. So do you have a framework in place? Do you actually instruct all of your staff what they need to do and how they need to do, how much they need to do? So is doing one webinar a year, technically, that's, tick, I've done professional development. Is that enough professional development? And if it is, how do you justify it? And so if is doing 40 hours a year or 40 webinars a year sufficient? How do you actually justify it and what's your rationale? So what I'd strongly suggest you do here is look at your whole workforce, look at the different areas that allow your team to effectively perform their role. What's required for your admin staff? What's required for your support staff? What's required for your trainers and assessors? How do you build that framework that clearly articulates what you're expecting from your team and how you monitor that on an ongoing basis as well? Next, it says that training and assessment is delivered to vet students by credentialed people, with current skills and knowledge in training and assessment. So this is essentially making sure that everyone's got their TAE. I won't go into the credentials policy, but essentially, as long as you've got the TAE 40110 or above, so the 16 or the 22, you're now a qualified and expert trainer and assessor, and you need to maintain current skills and knowledge in training and assessment. So you need to make sure you're maintaining professional development and skills and knowledge in as an educator. I won't go through all of those in detail because I know that Wisenet has some really great functionality around this. So over to you, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Kevin. So, as I was previously saying, yeah, I would strongly encourage you to record all of the professional development activities that your staff undertake, and same staff, not just your trainers and assessors, as Kevin said, but all staff, including your marketing staff and your admin staff and your student support staff. If you're setting up a course offer and you've got the different offers for the different modules that the different cohorts of staff might need to complete. Keep records of those in Wisenet so that you know that is all kept current. You can also set tasks for when they need to update those. And you can record all of that information in staff checklists and logbooks. It doesn't just mean trainers and assessors. You can have all of your staff in there and be recording all of the staff professional development activities in there to make sure that you're keeping all that on track. And as we sort of said, as far as the tasks can be sent out, the logbooks can be saved with the evidence of it, or a link to your drives where that evidence is kept to make it easy to access at time of audit. And also with your trainers, make sure that you can use the Wisenet function for the trainers and assessors, where you can use the scope section to link the courses and units that they're able to deliver, so that you're sure that they've got those skills and currencies as well. And you can see clearly how many trainers and the staff you've got to be able to deliver that training course that you have. It's important again to get the feedback to continue this on. So automate your student surveys. It can be SurveyMonkey or it can be any survey functionality that you're using, but you can also automate the links going out using our Learn Cycle functions. And the support cases, again, is going to be a great thing for everyone to be able to use. The good thing about it, because things like complaints and things like that, or the personal well-being, we have functionality for certain things to be able to be sort of restricted and private to certain teams or a certain person to be able to access. So it's not like it's up there in Wisenet for everyone to see. There may be some personal concerns for students that you can restrict in Wisenet and can only be viewed by certain staff members who are allocated to those tasks. So yeah, we've got some great and very exciting functions that can help you maintain your compliance, but also have the evidence of your compliance all stored within Wisenet. Thanks, Kevin.
Lovely. Thanks, Michelle. And that brings me on to the trainers and assessors competencies. So again, Wisenet has that functionality as well to record some of this for your trainers and assessors to say this is the qualifications and skills that they've got. And also importantly, and I think I'll just highlight some of this as well, if I can find my mouse now, is making sure that all of your trainers and assessors have the competency and currency in their vocational area or their industry area. So when we're looking at this as well, and I'll just underline the word, is maintaining an understanding of current industry practices. The definition of industry currency from the standards point of view has slightly changed, and this is what I was saying before, that some people have considered this a watering down. However, how you actually maintain an understanding of current industry practices is all about how you actually engage with industry, what industry expects of practitioners in that area, and how you can demonstrate that you're maintaining your skills, knowledge, and understanding of those industry areas according to what those industry sectors would expect. Again, a whole 1 hour webinar just on industry currency that I'm sure we can do another day, Natalia and Michelle, or another time. Finally, the quality area, so this is not quality area 3, this is quality area 4 around governance. We're looking at leadership, accountability, risk management, and continuous improvement. And I think this is a really important quality area. I think this is really for all parts of the organization. It's not just about the CEO and the board of directors looking at governance. This is really about all parts of the organization, really understanding what's required and how to do things and making sure they're mitigating risks. So first of all, RTOs need to operate with integrity and maintain accountability for the delivery of quality services. So again, fit and proper person requirements, not a huge deviation. It's governing persons, and I'll just underline a few things here as well in terms of governing persons here. The organization's governing persons. It's governing persons are suitable persons to oversee the operations. It's governing persons act diligently and make informed decisions which facilitate compliance with this instrument. And the governing persons lead a culture of integrity and fairness and transparency in the organization. So I've highlighted a few things there. So obviously the governing persons could be very ambiguous, but when we look at the definition of governing persons, it says obviously anyone that exercises a material or managerial responsibilities for the operations of the organisation. So governing persons, obviously, without a doubt, are boards of directors who govern the organisation, senior executives like the CEO or the chiefs of, and also your executive directors potentially that may exercise an amount of autonomy and direction and leadership within the organisation. You might even think people further down might be governing persons depending on how you've actually accounted that accountability or assigned that accountability rather, and what your definition is. So again, how do you demonstrate you've identified who your governing persons are? And how do they meet these criteria? I've circled a culture of integrity. Culture, again, is very subjective. How do you demonstrate or how do you comply with, when we think about are we compliant? Do we comply with a culture of integrity? Again, this is a great example of how we move away from a compliance mindset to a quality mindset. What are the things that we need to do to build that culture and how do we actually demonstrate good culture within our organizations? Again, something for you to think about. Roles and responsibilities of training organisations, staff, and third parties are clearly defined and understood. Okay, and this is not just about having position descriptions. Yes, we've got position descriptions, but how do you make sure that there's a clear definition of roles and responsibilities, accountability assignment, and also making sure that people understand their roles. They know what they need to do, when they need to do it, and how they need to do it. So part of this as well is having your third parties in check as well. So if you do have third parties and delivering through third parties or you're using them for recruitment purposes, do they know their roles and responsibilities? Are they aware of their obligations? And how do you clearly demonstrate that you've provided them that information? Standard 4.3 talks about risks and risk management. And I think this is really a very topical and important for organizations because a lot of conversations I've had RTOs say, yes, we've got a risk management plan in place, or we've got risk management, enterprise risk management policies and procedures. But one question I always ask is, what's the maturity of your risk management processes? Do you just have a risk management plan and here's a risk management register? But how is it integrated into your organization? Do people know what the risks are and how to mitigate these risks? Are the controls you've got in place to mitigate those risks effective? And do you test them on a regular basis to make sure that they're actually effective and working? So having an effective risk management plan in place or an enterprise risk management plan is vitally important, and testing it, looking at the maturity of your model to say, we've got a very basic system or it's well integrated into our organization, and getting that assessed, getting someone to come in and say, well, your risk management is great, it's integrated, or here are some areas for improvement around your risk management, because this really is at the core of effective governance and leadership within your organizations. Now, continuous improvement. This is the topic on everyone's lips. Continuous improvement. How do we identify areas for improvement and then improve our organization? So what we need to do here is that RTOs undertake systematic monitoring and evaluation of the organization to support quality delivery, the continuous improvement of services. So this is where we have a strategic and systematic approach to continuous improvement. Do we have effective models of assurance in place, understanding our first line of defense in terms of our quality management systems, the training for our staff, our second line of defense being our quality management, quality controls and risk management in place. And do we have effective third line of control, which is an effective internal audit process and mechanisms? Having good, effective assurance mechanisms in place, collecting relevant data, testing your systems and controls, making sure they're effective, making sure that your controls are working well and people are aware of what they need to do. This really is the core of self-assurance processes. Having a systematic monitoring and evaluation of your systems and processes is absolutely vital. And that brings me on to, I suppose, my next concept about doing a gap assessment within your organizations, because as we've transitioned from the old standards and now 31 days into the new standards is really about comparing where you are now, as in today, and where you actually need to be with the new standards. And I did a session very similar to this a few days ago, talking about the blind spots. Do you actually understand where your blind spots are? Do you understand what you need to do? Because we might be very focused on looking at the things that we think, with our own biases, what we need to look at. And do you have blind spots? Because it's not what you've changed that will get you in trouble, it's what you haven't changed that might get you in trouble with the regulator. So doing a gap assessment, and again, just internally within your own organizations to evaluate what might be missing. What are the things that you haven't looked at that you need to change? What are the things that are a bit risky? So is there ambiguity in terms of what you're doing? And I've highlighted a few of these things where there is ambiguity. What is fit for purpose? What are the definitions of our well-being and support that we're going to do? How are we actually going to determine, support for students and provide that support? So what might be a bit ambiguous and risky for your organisation, and what are the things that might be outdated? And again, the way we look at the standards now has changed. We've got to shift our mindset from a compliance view to a quality view. And what are the things that we used to do that we might just be a tick box to now saying we need to integrate these systems into our organisation to make sure we've got quality outcomes. And so what does a good, effective gap assessment look like? And I'll spend a couple of minutes in here because I know we're almost out of time, but really understanding, your criteria. What are the things that you need to look at and to meet? So obviously your outcome standards, your compliance standards, your credentials policy, and other obligations. What's the obligation you've got to your organisation? How do you actually meet this is through your documented system. So it might be your first line activities where you've got your policies, procedures, processes, frameworks, strategies. This is telling us your documented systems, telling us how you're going to meet this particular criteria. And ideally, you've done all of the work since about March. You've updated your policies, procedures. You've changed 1.3 to 4.6 and 5.9 to 7.8 or whatever it may be in terms of trying to change your policies, procedures. Updated it from standards for RTOs 2015 to standards for RTOs 2025. And wonderful. You've got a big tick here. You've done everything you needed to do. But now part of your gap assessment should be testing your systems and saying, have you actually got the records and are you collecting what you need to do to say that you've done what you said you're going to do? So you're saying what you're going to do here in your documents, and your records now might tell a different story. So this is where your student files, your trainer files, completed assessments, minutes of meetings, these are the records you might be collecting. Now, early days, 31 days in, you may not have all of the records to demonstrate full compliance to the standards yet because you haven't had your academic governance meetings yet, or you haven't had time to get into your accountability assignment matrices, etc. But this is where we need to check what you're actually doing in terms of your records. This tells the story of how you've implemented the standards. And ideally, you've got what you're doing is going to meet the criteria as well. So your outcome standard says, yes, we can see that there are good quality outcomes. And yes, ideally, you want to tick here as well that you're actually doing what you said you're going to do. So as you do your gap assessment internally within your organization, you're going to look at and triangulate this and say, this is what we need to achieve. This is how we said we're going to do things. And here's the evidence to support how we've actually done things. And ideally, you're going to get your 3 ticks all across to say, yes, we comply. We've assured ourselves that we're meeting the criteria. And this is how we've done it. This is the evidence to support what we've done. So from insight into action, you've all come to the webinars, you've done your training, you are now 100% audit ready, hopefully. So don't wait for the performance assessment from the regulators to reveal the cracks in your organizations. Make sure you schedule your gap assessment internally. Get people that are competent in your team to actually go through and evaluate the work that you've done. So if you've been doing the work, get someone else to come and check it. I know sometimes it might be a bit daunting to get someone to come and check it, but get your colleagues, your friends to come and be your critical friend so that they can say, look, this is what we think we need to do or how we can actually improve things. If you don't have capability within your teams, make sure you go and get yourself a trusted advisor, a critical friend that's going to come in and say, hey, you're doing things really well, or hey, you need to improve or pick up your socks in these particular areas. Importantly as well is involve your whole team. The new standards now, as we saw before, involves everyone in your organization. It's not just the CEO and the trainers and assessors. It's everyone from admin staff to compliance staff to support staff to sales staff, and involve everyone in the process of transitioning from the old standards to the new. And use a framework to actually systematically go through your gap assessment, making sure that you've got good systems and processes in place. You said you're going to do something, making sure you do what you said you're going to do, and what you're doing actually meets the good quality outcomes as well. So on that note, I'm happy to take some Q&A. I know there's a question that's come through just around trainers and assessors. That says, does a trainer need to hold the unit of competency for each unit they train? in their training, or can they evidence through mapping of industry knowledge? And thanks for that question, Danielle. Absolutely. You don't need to necessarily have the unit of competency that you're training and assessing, but you need to demonstrate equivalency to that. So ideally, and as the standard says, you need to have the qualification or a higher level, or equivalent to. And so in those circumstances where you don't necessarily have exactly the same unit of competency, you can demonstrate equivalency. And the way I describe this or explain this is this way, and this is I suppose a paradigm shift for some people. That if you're going to have a trainer and assessor delivering a unit of competency and assessing someone as being competent in that unit of competency, they've got to know something about that unit that they're teaching and they're assessing, going, yes, you've met that particular standard. And so in a roundabout sort of way, if you had a student come to you and said, I'm just going to fill out a trainer matrix, for example, and says, this is the unit that I want, and here's all of the experience that I've got. I'm just going to put it in a matrix for you and say that I've got this unit to do an RPL, for example. You've got to ask yourself, would you accept a student's evidence for an RPL just that they've filled out, I've worked in industry for 35 years and I did a similar unit 35 years ago? Would you accept that as evidence to issue a statement of attainment for that unit of competency? And hopefully you're all sitting there going, oh, absolutely not. Because if we're doing an RPL, we've got to ask them questions. We're going to have a conversation. We'll collect more evidence of, satisfactory performance and to the performance criteria and et cetera, et cetera. So you absolutely would not ideally issue the statement of attainment to that student. And so here comes the paradigm shift. If you wouldn't issue a statement of attainment to that student, why would you then allow someone to train and assess someone in that unit if you didn't collect a similar sort of evidence to support competency for that unit? So when we're looking at a trainer's and assessor's competency or equivalency, if you don't have exactly the same unit, if you've got exactly the same unit, you're saying, well, someone has independently assessed that person as having that competency. But if they don't have the same, what evidence are you going to support or collect to demonstrate equivalency, to demonstrate that person has the competency to that particular competency standard? So again, that's the question. I'll leave that as a rhetorical question for you to think about. What evidence would you need to collect and retain about that trainer and assessor if you're going to allow them to train and assess and tell people that they're competent or not competent in that unit? So hopefully that answered your question, Danielle. I've got another question here. With regards to that question, what if the other regulatory body mentions that they would like this? If other regulatory bodies, so I'm assuming there might be instances, and look, I'll put a caveat on that, Danielle and Scott. There's a caveat on that bit where there might be instances if they're licensing requirements that require you to have the exact unit. So, and I think the example there was CASA. So if you are required to have the exact same unit, and generally that's around licensed units. So if you're doing, let's say, forklift, working at heights might be an example. CASA, where they're regulated industries, you may be required to have that. And then in those circumstances, absolutely, it's explicit. If it's not explicit to say that you must have the same unit, then you can demonstrate equivalency. And then if where you are demonstrating equivalency, making sure you've got evidence to support someone's ability to train and assess in that particular unit. Thanks for those questions. I know I'm 4 minutes over time, Natalia. I hope I've answered everyone's questions. I think I'm happy to stay on for another minute if anyone's got more questions.
It looks like we have a question from Kevin as well.
And that's not me, Kevin. I'm not asking my own Dorothy Dixons. So Kevin says, we conduct development PD sessions for staff, but they often struggle to complete them. What are some effective ways to organise, manage, and support staff in completing their PDs? Kevin, that's a great question, and I I'm known to be a teaspoon of concrete sort of person, because I say working in vet is a very important job. It's a great fulfilling role, especially if you're a trainer and assessor. You're providing skills and knowledge of that, your skill and knowledge, and transferring that to your students. And it really is a great fulfilling role. But there are obligations. And one of those obligations is to undertake continuing professional development. So, as a regulated industry and as a professional, you should always be undertaking professional development. And I very facetiously, and I'll repeat it here, I facetiously say, look, if you don't want to do professional development, go and get yourself a job at the post office and sell postage stamps because you don't need PD to sell postage stamps. But if you want to work in vet, you absolutely have to do it. You should take pride in your career. You should take pride in your industry area and work towards excellence within your organisation. That's my teaspoon of concrete response for you, Kevin. However, that's not what you wanted to hear. I
I would
think it's important to make sure you create an environment and a culture of ongoing and lifelong learning for your organizations. And it's amazing how many times I go to organizations of, RTOs, training organizations, even some universities, institutes of learning and training and development that don't necessarily have the same culture of ongoing lifelong learning within their staff and their trainers and assessors. So I think building that culture within your organization, talking about professional development, putting it up for display to say this is what people have done in their professional development, celebrating it as well, having clear frameworks to say this is what we expect in our organization, and sometimes even gamifying it. That can sometimes motivate some people. Now, it won't motivate everyone, but this is about building a culture and trying to encourage people to undertake their professional development. And finally, making sure that they subscribe to Wisenet's professional development so they can come along and get some PD with wonderful people like Michelle and Natalia.
Thanks, Kevin.
But on that, I think that's all the questions.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your time and also for Michelle for jumping in at the last minute. Really appreciate both of you having done this webinar. We will be sending a recording of it to all attendees. So keep an eye out for that email. Oh, we do have another question that's come in as well.
I'm happy to answer
Um,
it. You keep going, Natalia, while I read the question.
Okay. But yeah, for everyone else, if you'd like to leave, you can. If you do have other questions, feel free to put them in. But yeah, just wanted to thank Michelle and Kevin.
Thanks. And if you've got any questions as well, or at Wisenet or otherwise, pop them up as a support ticket too. And we'll be happy to point you in the right direction and help you out as well.
Brilliant. A beautiful two questions. It's a double barrel question, which I love as well. So the first question is, I have two questions. Yeah, one is, given the shift in focus from compliance to quality and outcomes, what practical strategies or cultural changes will RTOs need to implement to effectively demonstrate their quality under the new 2025 standards? And number two, the new standards emphasise increased responsibility for self-assurance and clearer expectations of evidence but less prescription. How will RTOs balance this increased autonomy with the need to provide robust evidence of quality, particularly in areas like student engagement in training and assessment validation 1.5? Great questions. And I think it's really important to actually identify within your organization how you've actually been working before with your compliance mindset, your compliance hat. Are we compliant? How do we tick boxes to a quality outcome? And I think quality is very subjective. I think my Nissan Pulsar that I had 10 years ago is a really good quality car. Compare it to a BMW, it's probably not as high a quality as a BMW, perhaps, but quality is in the eye of the beholder. So part of demonstrating quality is building that culture of what quality means for your organization. So how do you actually collect information? So in your organization, do you actually survey your students, apart from the compulsory AQCF survey, which you have to tick a box and say we've done it, do you actually genuinely survey your students on a regular basis without having survey fatigue? But do you sit and have focus groups with them? Do you actually go and genuinely interview and survey employers, people that actually employ your students? And do you collect that information and actually use that feedback to improve your systems and processes? Do you actually genuinely go and engage with industry and genuinely, meaningfully get feedback for them to actually develop your learning resources and your assessment tools and practices? So this is what the outcome standards sort of imply to a certain extent, to say, how do you actually make sure you've got quality? Because quality is very subjective, like my Pulsar and BMW examples. So how do you actually demonstrate that your Pulsar is a really good quality vehicle? Is it fit for purpose? And what does that actually mean for you? So again, understanding how you collect information, who you collect it from. So as a practical strategy, how do you actually make sure that you collect information on a regular basis, you analyze that information and engage in meaningful changes to improve your organization? In terms of cultural changes, I think that's a very important aspect as well. So how do you actually change culture in an organization? And look, I've actually done a fair bit of study in this recently because we do culture, audits in culture, organizational culture, and how do you audit organizational culture? Well, this is about what do people do when no one's looking? What's the integrity that people have in their organizations? What do people talk about? What are the processes they go through? What's the behavior, the actual behavior of people when they're not necessarily being supervised, and how do they go about their work? And so part of this as a leader in your organization is how do you actually build that culture? And as we saw in some of the outcome standards, having that culture of integrity and transparency, how do you actually demonstrate that? And again, building culture is really important. It's about what you talk about. It's about the standards you walk past. If you allow as they say, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So, what sort of behavior have you accepted previously? And what's the behavior that you're expecting from your staff, your students, your stakeholders, etc. So a really good question about the practical strategies and I think that's really about looking at your outcomes and how you measure that and how you evaluate that and actually change what you're doing. Increased responsibility around self-assurance in your question two there and clearer expectations of evidence and less prescription. I think this is really about how organizations effectively manage quality assurance. And if you look at self-assurance, quality assurance, it's essentially the same thing. How do you make sure you assure yourself? Are you just navel gazing all the time? So you're internally saying, patting ourselves on the back, we're so wonderful, we're fantastic, we've got great survey results, and therefore we're doing wonderful things? Or do you benchmark against other organizations? And how do you benchmark? Do you have communities of practice with other organizations? So if you're delivering a particular area, is your organization members of associations, whether it's the TDA, ITECA, Community Education Australia? How do you actually make sure that you're involved in those community organizations to benchmark what you're doing? Do you get external auditors to come in and actually evaluate you and provide that having that critical evaluation of your performance? How do you actually use that information and analyze it and actually integrate it within your organization? So it's not an easy answer of saying this is the one thing that you need to do. I think there's lots of things that you need to do to change the culture and look at what your responsibilities are around self-assurance and how do you actually evaluate the effectiveness of your self-assurance and quality assurance. Do you actually assess your self-assurance models and go and get someone to critically evaluate that? So I think they're all the sort of things that I would expect to see in organizations to really take a lead in what you need to do as transitioning from the old way of thinking, compliance to quality outcomes. Sorry, it was a very long-winded answer, Michelle and Talia, but it was a very good question.
Just got a couple of extra ones.
Oh, yep. Right, there's a couple more there. So, can we assume progress of a student is in support? Good question. I think I'd say progress of students is it in support? It depends. An answer you probably don't want to hit. It depends. I think what you might be asking from that question is if students are progressing, is it also if you're providing support to that student, are they also progressing? I think having effective support for students and making sure they progress is is a multifaceted. It's going to be a multifaceted answer. One is making sure your training and assessment strategy, so making sure it's structured, it's fit for purpose. You've identified what's required to successfully complete the course. So if, for example, you've got a course that is extremely difficult, has high digital literacy requirements and high literacy requirements in reading and writing, and you accept someone with an ACSF level 1, I would expect that if that is the case, if you were going to accept someone with an ACSF level 1 and they need, to successfully complete it, they should have an ACSF level of 4 across all domains. It's okay to enroll that student if your strategy is to provide significant support because those ACSF levels are generally exit levels, so you can enter someone in at ACS level 1, provide them all of the training support that they need to raise their literacy levels to an ACS level 4 for an exit level to meet that. So how you design and develop the program for that particular cohort and identifying the support needs for those students is what I would be asking is how did you do that? Have you clearly identified it? Or have you enrolled someone potentially who wasn't necessarily suitable and the course wasn't appropriate for their level of existing skills and competencies? So that's sort of another long-winded answer for that. So I think it's multifaceted in terms of how you do it. Because if you've got one straggler, it's about really understanding, doing an effective pre-training review to understand whether it was suitable and appropriate. And if it's just because they're struggling because of other circumstances, that could be the reasonable adjustment you can apply as well.
I would also just say,
And there's,
sorry.
yeah, sorry.
I was going to say that I would also say that if that student is progressing, that's not necessarily demonstrating that they've received the support they required. It may be that, there's a review needs to be done, for those students who may have struggled and didn't get any support, but have still been assessed as progressing. So it may be, something that does need to be looked in for students who don't meet that entry requirement. If they're just going along with everyone else, it's probably one of those risk areas that you would need to sort of look at, particularly, and make sure that there's not just some tick, tick, tick. Yep, they've progressed. They're competent in that. Without support. So it may be a trigger for a bit of a look into that as well for quality.
Absolutely, absolutely. And finally, I'll take this as the last question, where it feels like there's more of an alignment to the ELICOS standards in some respects of the revised standards. And look, absolutely, I think there is certainly, as you can probably see, there's an alignment to make sure there is due care and diligence by RTOs to look after their students. And where we do have overseas students, such as ELICOS, for example, is making sure there's a duty of care there for your students and outcomes as well. On that note, I know we can be here all day with lots of questions coming through. There's some stuff, another question just come through about demonstrating you've identified students' ACSF levels. Best way to do that is through LLND assessments, and there's certainly a lot in the market there. I know Wisenet have ability to assist with those as well. And so, look, I strongly recommend contacting Wisenet to see how you can use that amazing piece of software to assist with your transition, because there's some great functionality that if you don't know all the functionality yet, get to know it well, because there's lots of things, especially around student support, enrollment, trainer assessor competencies, currencies, professional development that's available in the software to help you #comply with a lot of the components of the standards. But thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone's time and questions. And back to you, Natalia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin and Michelle, for your time. So I'm just going to end the webinar now, but thank you so much. And we've just got this QR code here. If you want to connect with Audit Express, you can just scan that and connect on LinkedIn.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone. Have a
everyone.
great afternoon.
See you.